All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to say hello to everyone and welcome to our webinar. And our webinar is on how you can turn your IT organization into a strategic partner for the business. Before I start, I would like to remind everybody that they are on mute and their video is off. But if you would like to ask a question, you can use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and your questions will get answered. This webinar is recorded, and the recording will be sent out after, as well as listed on our YouTube channel. And so for today, to get started, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Tracy Garcia. She is our Client Experience Director. And we also have James Melchor, who is our CTO. So I will go ahead and pull up our deck, and you guys can get started.
So Jordan, I'll go ahead and get started then. So basically, a webinar is going to be, turning your IT organization into a strategic partner for the business, and we're going to be covering several aspects of that, from client experience to just overall technology and several areas. So Jordan, if you don't mind moving on to the next slide, please. Next one, please. So, in the webinar, we're going to cover these, these areas from agenda perspective is, a little overview of who DYOPATH is, what are the objectives for this, covering a client engagement model, inefficiencies, and we're going to give you a couple of case studies, also covering user experience and really diving into IT maturity model, and then ending on another case study that really gives you a full picture of what we're trying to accomplish in the webinar. And then we'll open it up for questions at the end. All right, Jordan. So DYOPATH was founded in 1996, and we cover several different vertical markets such as commercial, government, education, and we're roughly about 65% commercial and 35% federal. We also support many different clients in 10 different industries, over 65 cities throughout the U.S., Mexico, South America, and Europe as well. And also, we currently maintain roughly, I will say it always increases, about 150 total certifications that really are very technical specific, as well as project management and other type of related items that, fall into IT as a whole. Also, we are a top secret security we also maintain a top secret security clearance with the U.S. government as well. And as you can see, since 35% of our business is federal, directly ties to that. So, all right, Jordan. So in this webinar, some of the objectives are really going to cover around, productivity issues, inefficiencies within IT, and what are those things that are really hold back IT environments today and don't really, make them a partner for the business or help to drive business value. We're also going to talk about, IT-related roadblocks and type of items that a lot of organizations can fall into and when trying to become a partner for the business. And also, we're going to walk through more of how to become that strategic partner, how to structure the IT environment from a program perspective to really assist. All right. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Tracy Garcia to cover the client engagement model piece. Thank you.
Thanks. I think this is a really good place for us to kind of dive in, because it helps to show how we begin really in the relationship. So this is our client engagement model. The way this model works is when we meet with a client early in the process of working together, we have a discussion and mutually agree on overall task management. The first step is we ask the question, what are those commodity type support services? They keep the lights on, but they're not necessarily considered high value tasks in the business, but they are critical to ensuring the systems are always secure and available. Once those support services are defined, we push them below an agreed to waterline, as you see here, and outsource them to a company like DYOPATH that specializes in providing these services. This allows the client's IT valuable staff to focus on more value-added, business-centric IT support functions. The next question we ask is, what are those types of IT needs or projects required to advance the business that require the skill set of the client's IT staff and possibly experience from an outside company like DYOPATH? Typically, customers require this outside assistance for one of two reasons. They may not have the subject matter knowledge, or they simply don't have the manpower required to accomplish the project, maybe in the amount of time that they need. This is where we work together with our clients to ensure all project outcomes are successfully accomplished. Ultimately, the goal is to position the customer's IT organization to add maximum value to the business by supporting and/or automating the strategic initiatives and have IT viewed as a strategic enabler for accomplishing business objectives. This engagement model approach results in business and IT alignment, resulting in greater productivity and efficiency for the organization. Next slide. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the impacts of IT inefficiency on an organization. And James, I welcome you to jump in here because I know you've got probably a great deal to say on this subject as well. Now, there's several factors that play into IT inefficiency or can play into IT inefficiency. And it might be, that the team simply doesn't have the ability to effectively manage a queue of tickets. You might have trouble staffing and managing. Sometimes you need really highly skilled people in those organizations. And if you lose somebody key to the organization, it can be difficult and expensive to backfill. And ultimately, a company and your end users, your very valuable employees, they rely on technology on a day-to-day basis, right? So how do we provide those end users with a good experience? How do we decrease the stress as it relates to technology and ensure that they're able to use the devices that they were given in a way that is effective for their job? Are the lead times to resolution, are they long? Are they, do we have somebody who might be traveling and has a big proposal to get out the next morning and needs a simple password reset? It's 11 o'clock at night and they can't get into their device. They're very stressed out. How do we assure that they have the support and the services that they need at the time that they need them to do their job effectively? So I like to think about IT efficiency by asking a couple of different questions. So one, how would the organization be different if the business and technology plans were better aligned? Could the organization scale without constraint? The other question I like to ask is, if an organization plans to grow or make a significant change and IT is well aligned from a strategic perspective, could it better accommodate that growth? So those are some of the things that I think about when I think of IT inefficiency. James, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on like the staffing and end user stress and those type of things. So, really when it relates to staffing and management of it, there's a lot of things, that like Tracy mentioned as well, but, skill set is a big one. So, with IT right now, as a lot of people know, security is very tough to staff. There, really skilled individuals in cloud can be very tough to staff, and those also impact the IT efficiency. So if you're not staffed correctly or have the right expertise, the demand from the business it could be very, very high, and then without having those skill sets, it's very hard for the IT organization to keep up, right? Which in turn is creating the end user stress. It's also creating lead time issues because organizations sometimes don't have the skill set to resolve those issues, right? And it impacts other items as well that, I know Tracy's going to touch on, but, that's one major component of it. And then just the overall management of that organization as well is another thing that impacts it, So, Tracy, that's kind of my take on a couple of those items, and I'll let you continue.
Yeah, so James, I know you, a couple slides ago, you talked about certifications that we hold. I don't know that getting those certifications for people, paying for those certifications, or keeping those certifications in-house is something you might want to talk about, because it is very costly, it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and ultimately, once they get those skills, once we've paid for those and we've invested the time and we've acquired those people, what are they focusing their time on? Are they able to use those skills for their function, or are they, fielding calls and grabbing tickets for those password resets?
Yeah, no, that's a great example there. From our perspective, really, we have to keep up to date with certifications and things like that. But it's very hard for a lot of organizations to keep up with those certifications and the cost associated with them. So, like we talked about with the skill set, it's very easy for smaller organizations or even medium organizations to keep high skill set individuals because they tend to be poached, right? Let's be honest, they tend to be poached by other organizations or IT, providers and things like that, or even the vendors themselves, right? I see it all the time in enterprise type accounts where those individuals get poached by Microsoft or a Cisco or something like that, right? And it's a big impact to some of those organizations. So it's really just understanding. That's why the management component is so important of setting up your environment, not so much around individuals and reducing that dependency, but really how can my organization run if I lose an individual, right? And lessening that risk as well. So.
Yeah, last I checked too, they don't necessarily give 2 months notice so that you can appropriately go find that next person,
that's true.
make sure they're a good cultural fit for your organization, and that they already come with all the skills needed to do the things to fill the void of who you lost. So some great inefficiencies there can happen. Next slide. So I'd like to talk about one of our clients. This is a long-term DYOPATH client called American Society of Plastic Surgeons, or ASPS. And I'm going to throw in a shameless plug here for our podcast. I'm not sure if you've heard of the DYOPATH podcast, but ASPS has actually been in a podcast already, and they have a show coming up as well, an episode that you should check out. But ASPS is the largest plastic surgery specialty organization in the world, representing 93% of all board-certified plastic surgeons in the US. And the reason I wanted to focus on ASPS as it relates to this topic is they've done an amazing job of transitioning their traditional information technology group. They actually went as far as to rebrand the group from information technology to business technology to most strategically align with the business and the business initiatives. They became a strategic partner for their business. They've got these members. The members have memberships, and they're looking for applications and things they need to be good surgeons, right? They don't care that the IT team is patching servers or how many passwords they reset or how they keep doing what they do to support the applications, the events, and the things that the members need. They started to focus their efforts on the power applications, the things that drive memberships, the things that keep the lights on at ASPS. They even went as far as to identify individuals in other areas of the business that could bridge the gap and help this business technology team best support and talk the talk of the members and their members' needs. So I think that they really took their organization from that traditional IT team and focused on how do we do this with the skill set that we have to best support the very critical part of our business, our members, and how do we make it not about technology, but about what our members need. Next slide.
All right, so Tracy, that was a great segue into IT maturity and IT maturity model. And the next couple of slides, I'm really going to dive into, what's the importance of it, right? And understanding where you reside. And just to be honest, it's not really where you start, but where you want to go, right? And that's the way we approach it when we talk to our clients or anybody that is trying to understand the pain points that they're having and why they're having them and where they need to go. So, we see that most organizations, for a multitude of reasons, they start off at that chaotic and reactive, phase. And really, it could be small organization, rapid growth, and the organization is growing so fast, the IT demands start to outpace the individuals that are there, right? It could be M&A activity, right, as well as they're starting to grow through acquisitions and mergers, and it's moving at a fast pace. They're onboarding different entities and things like that. And then also you have the carve outs as well that could impact that. And then you have the companies that contract, right, where they were larger organizations and they had big IT staffs that were in place, and then they're a quarter of their size, right? And I know a lot of companies have faced that challenge, over this past year, or over this past 2020 year as well. We've seen that. You see that a lot in the oil and gas space as well, with clients and other type of clients, or potential oil and gas clients. You see that quite a bit, right? So now they have the same demand, the same need, the same requirements with a quarter of the staff that they've had, right? So I always like to say, hey, let's not focus on why you're there. Let's focus on where we need to go. But like I said, majority of them, are in that chaotic and reactive state. But when you're in that state, you, as the slide depicts, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of cost. Those four where they're extremely impactful to the environment. They cause business SAT issues. They cause frustration of IT staff. It could actually impact the talent that you're able to keep, right? Because they just feel like the workload is just coming, just keeps on coming, but there's no investment back into from the business, right? And the approach that has to be taken is, okay, first we got to get out of that state. We got to look at being more proactive. We have to put the right processes, the right programs, the right tools in place, and making sure you have visibility. And I say being proactive is about having that visibility into the overall environment from a management perspective, from an operational perspective, from utilization of your people, utilization of the compute components, from network to systems to cloud providers and those type of things, right? You really have to gain the visibility. And then from there, you can start, when you start trying to move more into the service area, is understanding, okay, how can I use this technology and these processes and really these and be more efficient to structure the environment more as a service, right? So, implementing SLAs and other type of items like that, making sure there's processes in place, there's programs in place, there's the right skill sets. And if it's utilizing cloud strategies and things like that, that's another way of going about it to move up that IT maturity stack, right? And then from there, you ultimately, what you're starting to do is reduce the risk. You're hopefully reducing the cost as well, right? Because I think one of the big things to pay attention to is, as you move up that IT maturity model, is not just adding cost for the sake of adding cost. It's really being very calculated and very methodical about, okay, we're adding these tools for this specific reasons because they're driving efficiencies, not only with the IT organization, but with the business itself, right? Because ultimately, what is it trying to answer for the business? How is it going to help the business grow? And that's when you start really becoming a strategic partner for the business, right? And in the next two slides, I'm going to touch on what that looks like and what that means, and go into detail, because one of the hardest things is, where do I start and what does that framework look like, right? So from there, ultimately you're moving into that value where, you're trying to reduce the cost, reduce the risk, or reduce liabilities, but you're also helping the business grow more revenue because the IT organization, or like Tracy said, the business technology group can help drive revenue because they are able to respond quicker. They're working with the business on, okay, here's what we can do. Here's how we can do it better. Here's how we can enable your initiatives, right? With the staff that we have, or maybe there is an investment, but it's worth it because we're able to provide the stats, the visibility of what needs to be done. So, Jordan, if you don't mind moving over to the next slide. All right, so what does that look like, right? And really pushing that data over into, what are the business needs, right? So first, on the left side, you see the business, right? And you understand, okay, how does IT maturity impact the business, right? So as you can see, like the blue arrow going over to the right, there's always going to be the business needs. It's constant, right? But where the inefficiencies come into play, or IT maturity, is there's kind of submodels to the overall maturity, And I listed a couple because honestly, the larger the organization, the bigger those areas become. So you have your service maturity. So what are you providing from like a service desk perspective? What type of service to the client is the IT department providing, and how mature is that? Are you at an initial phase? Do you have your repeatable processes? Great, you know how to do them, but if somebody leaves, is it defined so that somebody else could pick it up and run with it, right? Is it being managed and monitored, from an overall management perspective, and is it being optimized, right? Do you have the right skill set? From a managed perspective, do you have the right skill sets? Are you training those individuals? How well are you training those individuals? And then what are you doing to optimize those services back to the business, right? So you got to rank your service maturity as well and look at that. When you do, it goes full circle, right? Then when you are optimizing it, you are moving it through those stages, you start to see the value that it brings back into the business, right? So those business needs are pushing, into the IT, but IT can also drive value back into the business by maturing these certain areas. Technology is a big one. So, not just, I'm gonna use this one as, are your servers up to date? Do you have the right versions? Is the physical hardware out of date? Is there support, right? A lot of organizations, I really think, get caught up in not understanding maybe the investment that is needed to keep up with those. And because of that, they fall behind, and then IT is not managing it, right? Sometimes, or they get so caught up in the day-to-day in that chaotic state, they come with, hey, here's a $200,000 bill to do this refresh. And you're like, well, why? And well, it's old, right? Well, we have to be more, we have to treat this a little better and more of a program to say, okay, look, my technology is at this stage. By this year, you're putting a roadmap together saying, I need to refresh it because of this, or it's not meeting the current demands, or we have compliance regulations now, and this gear just doesn't support it, right? And we see that some with like cloud technologies or things like that, where that's one of the reasons people move into cloud is, my technology is aging and it's not keeping up with my business needs, or the encryption levels are too low and things like that. So you got to manage it the same way. You have to understand, do you have a schedule in place for it? What's the roadmap look like? How is it going to hinder your business? What is it going to stop you from doing? Is it not optimized so that if they buy a new company, it takes 3 times as much time to deploy that technology because it is aging, right? That's not an optimized state, right? That's really where you got to make sure that the technology maturity is optimized to ensure that it can really drive value back into the business. Now, as we talk about cloud maturity as well from the business, really this is a big one because, what cloud technologies are out there to really help enable the business to move fast, right? They're always saying, and the demand is always there, we need to move fast. We need to move fast. What can we do differently? We need to be different in the industry that we're in, right? We need to stand out. And a lot of companies, I would say, need to look at cloud for how to be different. And I don't mean just your AWS and Amazon for like server hosting, but application hosting from a SaaS perspective, or really the platform as a service perspective, is like, what can I do differently than what we're doing today? And then you gotta go through those same stages as, really, are my processes repeatable? Are they defined? How well are we managing those cloud, environments? Is it optimized? Because if they're not, like I was saying before, as you move up that IT maturity model, one of the big issues is, you could be driving cost up as well as driving risk down, and that's really not an advantage, right? So you really have to really align what that cloud maturity model is, to, am I still driving down cost, right? Because you could be driving cost up, but driving value up as well. That's the difference. But what we see is people sometimes lose control of the cloud maturity and really start driving cost up, and the value or revenue for the business is staying, the same. So that's something to really pay attention to as you drive it through, this maturity model. The other one is security. And I will say security maturity has to be a 360 approach. It's not a one-stop, I check the box for the year, right? Cybersecurity insurance providers today, they were asking before, did you have a firewall? do you have this pen test? Great, once a year, those are great, but that's a snapshot in time. In reality, it's not, how am I really managing this stuff on a day-to-day basis. So security is one of the big ones. You have to make sure that your process, there's a program, there's processes in place, that it's repeatable, that it's defined. If you lose somebody, that somebody else can pick it up, that it's properly being managed, because it's so ingrained in overall business, and it's such an impact to risk. You see the phishing attacks, you see emails coming through about transfer X amount of dollars and things like that. Those are massive things that occur for businesses that have a major impact. So, and that falls on, overall IT's, shoulders, is, how mature are we from a security perspective? And this is one that really has to be moved up that, that IT maturity stack. And really there is a separate IT security maturity. That's going to show you, how the impact is on business in one slide. But that is one that, I see a lot of organizations get impacted with, there's a lot of costs, there's a lot of risk and things that come into play, and it's really ingrained throughout the whole organization. And then you have your overall operational maturity. And that means is, and it really, from an operational maturity perspective, how well is your group run? Like, how are you training your individuals? How are you giving them time off? There's a lot of things that come into that, because without a good, mature operational, team, a lot of these things will not be ran well, right? Like your services, your technology, the cloud, your cloud technologies you're using, or even your security. If your operational model is not mature enough, you will fall short on quite a bit of these things. So that's a big one as well, right? And without having these all really moving towards that optimized state, it's very hard for IT to drive value back into the business. That coming full circle. So that's this graphic just goes into detail around how business is constantly has a need, and how IT can really drive value back into the business.
Hey, James, I've got a question,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, as a panelist.
Yeah.
How does, where in this model does the end user technology needs, where do they fit? And how do they get buy-in from their executive team to view technology as enabler? Where does that fit, and how does one go about doing that?
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I'd love to answer that question on the next slide, because I'm going to go into support needs and kind of just give a visual of that. And if that doesn't answer your question, please let me know.
I will. Thank you.
All right. Jordan, next slide, please. So what does that look like, right? Because I said a lot of words in the last slide. And, it's like, where do I start? And really, I think the big thing is understanding what are those support areas. So when we talked about service, really about your service maturity and things like that, One is understanding those support areas. So end user support. You need what are you trying to capture? What are you trying to provide? And I only listed a few, but really I think an organization has to look at things and say, okay, I want to provide incident and problem and change and vendor and asset management, right? Anybody familiar with ITIL will realize those are main components for that, right? So what are we trying to do? And then from there, you're identifying what your incidents and problems are, but from what, right? What are those applications? What are those environments? So how are you cataloging the CRM, issues, or ERP or HR, applications that could be on-prem or cloud, and really start defining those. And, what are those operational or productivity applications as well? From an office, productivity being like Office 365 or a couple of other areas. So you really have to start defining those of, okay, what are those support needs that we're going to be supporting from a services perspective, right? What are my skill sets I need to be able to do that? And then you start peeling it back even more and say, okay, well, my on-premise infrastructure, right? I'm using this type of connectivity, and I'm using this type of compute and network and storage and backup, right? And you start realizing, okay, my technology in this area is not good. My processes are not defined in this area. So it's going to be very hard for me to, identify what the right incidents and problems are to help out my user community, because we really just don't have the visibility of these applications, right? So your end users are going to be upset when you just can't provide the service that you need. Right. So being able to draw out a view of what this looks like and defining what those applications are to really create your right support areas. It also helps you vet out why do I need my on-premise infrastructure, and it helps you understand the reasons. Right. It helps you understand, what type of compute connectivity, what risks are those bringing by utilizing these technologies as well. But also helps you support, what type of skill sets do I need? Do I even have those skill sets in-house, and then how do we manage them? And then you got like the cloud infrastructure component, which are very similar to the on-premise, but to me, these are the ones that are really, cloud infrastructure really is how you can impact a business significantly and move quickly, right? Traditionally in the past, you order a server and it shows up, maybe a week or two later or longer, and then you have to build it out and do things. Well, having companies utilize cloud technology, which I'm pretty sure everybody on this call is like, oh, I can spin something up within a day, or a couple hours and move from there. Or if I'm using even some of the newer type items, it's auto provisioning, servers because it sees a workload, that's being overtaxed and things like that, right? And building a lot of automation within that, right? So those are type of things that am I even taking advantage of those, right? You have to look at that, and you have to look at, do I have the skill set to support those and things like that as well. And when you start going through this model and defining out, really the needs and the support needs that you have, you start to realize my team might not be large enough to support this, or I can't provide the right support to the end users because, we're just not efficient, right? Or we don't have the right amount of staff or skill sets, or we don't have the right policies or procedures or those type of things in place for each one of these areas, right? To me, that's, Tracy, how you can get buy-in, because you can map this back to one, really those business applications and what you're trying to provide for those end users could be very impactful. Also with the cloud technology component, right, and I'll touch on security in a minute, is that's where you can also get buy-in from, leadership, because, I'm trying to move this quick and this is why, and here's how we're going to save you money. And then from a security perspective is this is how we need to reduce risk for the organization, because it does have a financial impact on the business if this occurs. It's also credibility. A lot of people, there's a credibility hit you can take by not being secure and things like that as well, right, in the industry. And that's not a differentiator you want with other competitors in your market. So that's another thing to take in consideration. So as we move through that model and we start talking about, the maturity model as you're as a service, moving into that service model and really driving value, I like to look at things as IT as a service, right? Because you want to run it as a service. Like and really also security. Security has to be, in my mind, run as a service, as a program. It's just not about tooling. It's just not about skill sets. It's a 360 approach. So, in both of these, and I'll touch on IT as a services, you have to assess yourself. You got to understand where you're at and measure yourself to say, where are we going? We're at this level now, and we need to move, forward. And then really from the advise and VCIO perspective is, how we are aligning, what are we doing right from a strategic? It can't just be tactical, right? If you want to be a strategic partner to the business, you have to look at things from a more strategic perspective, as a VCIO, as a CIO, right? And look at it from an advisory role, not so from in the weeds. And then you start looking at, okay, I know I need to provide the service desk, component, right? And that ties back up to the support areas. And this really gets into operational structure and things like that. And then I need to provide network support. And then now you can tie it back to what type of network support do you need, and infrastructure support being, systems and those type of things. And then really into application and then cloud support. And then niche engineering support. So if you don't have the expertise in those certain areas, then you align yourselves with partners that have that level of engineering support that can help support your model, that will help you really drive business back into or drive value back into the business. So. And then cybersecurity as a service, like I said, it's not a snapshot in time. That's kind of, I think, a little older way of looking at it is you have to always be assessing yourself constantly. You get a pen test or you get a vulnerability test or something like that, or a vulnerability assessment. What occurs is, great, that happened once that year, but the hackers never stop. They are attacking people all the time. They're not like, hey, hands off for that full year. So, it's a different mentality, right? It's really this 360 approach, and it has to be monitored and managed and, constantly. You fall into the same advisory type role. You have to look at things differently. How can it, impact the business from a risk perspective, revenue perspective? You have to be looking at your vulnerabilities that you have, so there's vulnerability management of, okay, my end users, how are they susceptible? What can manage those applications? What inventory do we keep in? What can be vulnerable on those, and the applications? And really, this is where the justification in my mind also comes into play, is when you're identifying not just the vulnerabilities like a patch, but what are the vulnerabilities within my processes and procedures as well, at every different support area, and then you start looking at tooling. I will say there's services, like you have your mail security services, malware, prevention, EDR, endpoint detection and response, and mobile device management and SIM, and all those are tying back to really vulnerable components within your environment. So I have my end users, like hackers will be going after them. They'll go after my applications, and they'll go after my infrastructure if it's on-prem or cloud, or they'll attack your processes, right? So those tools are there to mitigate those risks, right, and provide visibility, as we talked about in the previous slides. And then you start, okay, what are the support requirements needed for those? How do I need to structure my organization? Or, this is something we can't take on. We need to look at a managed, security or managed security provider for that. And then also you need to start looking at, employee training. So, how do you stop them from being susceptible to these type of attacks? So educating the end users, educating executives, everybody, and having that as a 360 approach of, we need to be training our people on this and these vulnerabilities as much as we train them on our business processes, because really at the end of the day, hackers are using technology to get into the environments, but at the same time, they're using it to exploit processes and procedure of your business. So they're really exploiting the maturity of your organization, if you want to look at it from that perspective, as well as the IT and your maturity of IT. So once they're in, they send phishing email attacks, right? They understand your processes. So educating employees is critical. And then from there is the documentation piece, right? And I throw this under security, not necessarily always IT, is because they're commingled, honestly. So understanding what my processes, my procedures, and keeping that up to date, right? Understanding the end user support needs, educating on those, right? Because that funnels right back into the employee training. It could be, the user community, or it could be IT. So really having a strong documentation process in place as well, right? That helps move up the IT maturity model. And then regulatory support, I will say. So, if there is, ISO certifications, or if there's, COVID, or, you have PCI DSS and those type of things. Some organizations just don't have the ability to keep that level of skill set or expertise in house. And that's where you really align and say, okay, and that could funnel back into the VCIO or VCISO type role, where they're advising on what you need to do, how you need to do it, providing assistance with documentation and those type of things, right? Because at the end of the day, you got to do all this stuff, and you got to maintain the audits and things like that come down as well. So hopefully that gives everybody kind of a good view of, here is the IT maturity model. Here's how it can drive, value, how the business need, drives into IT, how that funnels back and become a value to the business, and then kind of where to start. What does that really look like? So hopefully, we accomplished that with this slide. So Jordan, next slide, please. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over. If there's no questions, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Tracy.
All right, so being director of client experience, this is my favorite slide. I'm very excited about this slide, and I want to talk about the SLA. I want to start with the SLA. And I think that there is a misconception that only MSPs or people that provide this service are the ones that have an SLA. And I think that everybody in a technology position in any organization, be it internal or external to that organization, has an SLA. And they've got to do a good job to make sure that they understand what is the SLA? When do I have to get this thing done, this request done to meet the end user needs? And to understand that, you've got to understand what is the technology doing for this person? Why do they need it? And why do they need it in this amount of time? So everyone has an SLA. If you are supporting an end user, you have an amount of time that you need to get to that ticket on, to get to that issue on, to complete that project by. But there's a difference between the SLA and the XLA. So the SLA is it's a defined set of time and agreed to parameters that a ticket or a task has to be done in. And if you meet that SLA, your end user should be happy, right? And I don't think that's necessarily true. So there's this other factor, this, I guess, intangible factor called the XLA, the customer experience level agreement. So you took care of this ticket and it was really fast and they should be very happy, right? That's not necessarily the case. Now, how did you treat that person during the ticket? Did you make them feel inadequate because their problem was insignificant to you and they should have been able to do it themselves? Or did you make that user feel supported because at the end of the day, the technology they were trying to use wasn't supporting the function that they needed it for? And that's frustrating to them. And maybe they blew it out of proportion. Maybe it's below your skill set. But how did you make that person feel? Did you take the time just to simply ask them, how's your day going? At the end of the ticket, hey, did this solve your problem? Is there anything that I can do to further educate you so you don't experience this problem in the future? Is there anything else going on in your world that may not be a problem that I could help be more efficient for you, that could help you do your job better by using the technology that I support? And I think that this gets missed in a lot of different areas. So I have a good example. A couple weeks ago, so one of the things I do is I review every single survey that comes in from a client. We send out a ticket survey for every ticket that goes out. I personally review every single survey that comes in to see, how are we doing? And I look at the numbers, I look at the SLAs, I look at, did we get a 5 out of 5 in all areas for this ticket? But then I also read the comments at the bottom. And so recently we had this ticket and it was all fives. So I should have just breezed past that survey into another survey, but I read at the bottom one sentence and it said, I wish the tech had been more personable. And so I thought to myself, well, gosh, this SLA, these numbers look perfect, but something is off. So I contacted the end user and I went as far as I pulled the recording and I listened and we did a great job, but there was a lot of dead air while we were working on the ticket. And there are things I just feel like we could have done a little bit better. So we used that as a training opportunity. We played it for the group and we talked about, how could we have done a better job? We did solve the problem and we solved it very quickly. But what else could we have done to improve that XLA? And I think that there needs to be a better focus on that end user and their experience with technology. Technology is a tool. And it's our responsibility and the IT department's responsibility to ensure that those tools are effectively working for the people that need them to work, to support the business, to do their function that the business needs them to do. Anybody have any questions, comments on that? James?
Tracy, do you mind if I kind of add to that?
Please.
So, one of the things when Tracy and I were actually like looking at, the slides and talking about, just experience level and things like that, I think it's so critical and there's such a value for it, right? And especially within our organization, because of what we do, because really it creates that that information like a feedback loop, right, into the organization. Because it's not just about it, like Tracy said, it's not about, hey, my SLA was great, I met this, right? It's about what can I do, to improve it. Those individuals that are, working those tickets have the ability to, one, talk to the end users that have the frustration with the applications. They're experiencing it. It's their day-to-day, information that they could feed back to us to funnel back to the rest of the organization or to one of our clients' internal IT organizations to say, hey, you might think that this application is working this way, but your user community has this feeling, right? That funnels back into IT maturity because that's a feedback loop. That's saying, oh, that's not working the way we wanted it to work. And you're not going to get that unless you're really on that the end user has. So I think it's extremely vital, and that's why we talk about SLAs and why they're good and different than SLAs. That's a prime example. So.
Yeah, I feel like the SLA is a given, right? You set the SLA because you need to meet the SLA.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens. It needs to happen. I mean, there's a reason that SLA was set. The XLA is the above and beyond, and it's really being able to put yourself in that user's shoes, in their position, and understand why is this critical to their function? How can I make sure it works the most effectively that it can? And how can their experience here be good so that they feel that they want to remain here, that they want to keep doing their position here that impacts the business. So I think it's super important, and I think it needs to be a bigger focus of IT in general.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide. All right, James, you want to talk a little bit about Pathfinder?
Yeah, I will. And then, based on our last slide, I think I'll let you touch on the XLA component, at the end of this. So really, when we started talking about IT maturity, we went through we started with like client engagement model, and then we started to go all the way through IT maturity and the progression and identifying, what needs to be done, and then all the way into, really the SLA and the XLA component, right? And this case study with Pathfinder, I think, is a great example of that. They looked at themselves and they said, hey, we have a lot of traditional, traditional in-house IT, but we need to grow. We need to move quickly. We got to remove the risks. They identified it, pretty early on and, reached out and we had a lot of conversations, right? So they had these challenges that we talk about from an IT maturity perspective. and they quickly started to move over into, the 24/7 service desk to be able to take advantage of the support that they're providing their their user community, refining their processes by, aligning with an ITSM that is ITIL aligned. They're looking at the type of tickets they have, and then also, they jumped on board with, we need to get away from the traditional IT, model and get away from all these hardware investments and things. We need to move quicker. So they adopted Microsoft Azure and moved over into that type of cloud environment. And from there, really, we provided a lot of expertise from staff, like as you saw, engineering support on one of the previous slides I had. We started to provide that expertise in niche areas to really help from that perspective. But, really, they started to look at IT as a business enabler and what they could do and how they could do it better. And then overall, what it helped them with is, drive costs down. They were able to save costs by doing that. Then they also increased uptime. All these, yearly upgrades and refreshes and other things like that, and ties to the local office they had. And, those were all pretty much eliminated. And, one of the big things that, was also accomplished is they were able to move over and see the SLAs. 100% of the SLA goals were met and exceeded, because they were moving over into more of a mature IT environment, utilizing cloud in a more mature way as well. And really, one of the other, I think amazing things is, they finished their transition into Azure right before, I want to say, kind of lockdown for COVID. And, that was a big thing for them. They were able to have all of their workforce go remote, not have the same ties into the environment. And they were really great. They were really thankful for that as well, because now I don't have to worry about that as well, right? My technology enabled us to have a mobile workforce during, the challenges that a lot of people experience, during this COVID, during COVID lockdown and other things like that. So, Tracy, with that, I'm gonna leave it up to you to kind of go into the XLA component and how that really ties back as well.
Yeah, so like James mentioned, we've got this amazing SLA. 100% of the goals were met or exceeded. And again, I think that's the expectation. That's the requirement that they had for the services that we provide. And they should have that. But, above and beyond that, having their, this XLA, employees always having someone to call no matter what time of day or day of the week, I think is the experience. These people, I have learned, are in some pretty remote areas. Their focus is on doing their job, providing insurance, and they need technology to be able to do that. And, when the pandemic hit and they were having to do this all of a sudden remotely, I think it gave them great comfort. I know it gave them great comfort in being able to call in when they needed it, get the support that they needed, get a friendly voice that was able to help them through that crisis that they were in at that moment. And I think that they've had a great XLA experience. All right, so next slide is the Q&A. If there are questions, Jordan.
Yes, I believe we have a few questions. So the first one, in your experience, how long does it typically take to move a mid-market organization to the value stage in the IT maturity model?
Yeah, Tracy, if you don't mind, I'll take that one. I mean,
do.
Really, it depends, right? On several things. I could say, depending on what they want to tackle, you could move within about 6 months. I would say easily. Now, it depends where you are in certain areas, so that's where it kind of makes it a little bit harder. I will say moving over to a partner like DYOPATH and taking on the service desk and not components. Those are instantaneous things that you can do to move up those charts. But the big thing is, that takes, I think, a little bit longer is looking at the business, establishing the communication with the business, and that's the longer, component. But really, gaining the visibility is the quicker component. Onboarding of services for for us, 45 days, I would say, to start getting a lot of visibility that most organizations didn't have, before. And then you build on that, right? So, within 1 year, you could move up fairly quick. But really the harder stages, the last two, are really the ones that really drive with ownership, buy-in and things like that as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, James. Our second question, what does a time frame look like from chaos to proactive and even to add value?
Same kind of question. I mean, from chaos to proactive, that could be fairly quick. Aligning yourself with a good partner, that's something that really can be done. I think in just this day and age, with the way how fast technology and security is moving, trying to do it in-house is great, but I really would say look at, a partner to do that, because that's honestly where you're going to make the best, the most impact. Somebody that's done it, somebody that has the processes and procedures and things like that in place, could move you from, chaotic to proactive within 45 to 60 days. And then really start building on that, because once you start cataloging all that data and looking at the types of services and issues that you're having, that's when you really start to have the ability to drive, a value in the company and start creating a plan to say, this is what we're going to tackle to move us more into that, bringing value into the organization. So
awesome. And then for our last question, we have, how do I get buy-in from my executive team in regard to viewing technology as an enabler? The lack of executive sponsorship is holding back the maturity of our IT model.
Yeah, I think that was kind of similar to the one Tracy, Tracy asked. But I will say you have to outline, and Tracy helped me out here too. You have to outline really what you're trying to provide, and understanding what your environment looks like, right? So you got to look at those two, and you got to be able to map the deficiencies, right? And go to the business and say, if you want us to move this fast, we need this level of technology, but here is the support that we're going to wrap around that to ensure that we don't fall back into those same type of pitfalls. I think you have to do that based on every one of those maturity areas that I showed. And from there, you can link it back to a business need, business requirements, what the business wants to do, if it's, growth. Really, I mean, that's kind of my approach on there. Tracy, anything to add there?
Yeah, I do actually. So I think having the conversation, they may not be using the most technology or the most difficult technology, but how are people using the technology? What other things, it's likely that they're connecting with people in your industry that might have a technology that's different, that might make their job more efficient. What other technologies are they interested in, so that you can work it into your plan and make sure that you have the technology, the backbone, all of the highly technical things that James talked about to support how your end users are actually using technology.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'd like to just thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar today, and a recording will be sent out and also listed on our YouTube channel. Thank you, and I hope everybody has a good day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.